What up, y'all? Welcome to another live stream with Champagne Sharks. I'm Be the Star, and of course, T, and a special guest, Dr. CBS, Charisse Burden-Stelly. What's up?
Yo, what's up?
You can go first, girl.
It's late. It's 9 o'clock. It's my bedtime.
Fair enough. I'm still on my West Coast time, so I'm good. But thank you so much for joining us here because I see you. I first got introduced to you on Twitter via my co-hosts from Afro Gym Revolt. Shout out to Nina and Kay. And basically, I was like, "Who's Dr. CBS?" And then they were like, "You don't know Dr. CBS?" And so I was like, "Okay, let me see who this person is." Started following you on Twitter. Next thing I know, I'm like constantly I'll go to your page to see if I missed anything. Because sometimes you say, because you know why you're a professor, and you're a scholar, but you don't talk like one on Twitter. Like you have the same concepts and you introduce these ideas and theories to us, but without it sounding pretentious, like how most professors sound. So I appreciate you for that alone.
Well, thank you for that. That's good. I'm code switching, so that's good that I'm doing okay at that.
Man, I'm not doing okay. You're fucking great at it. Because I watched your other interviews because the way that you do it is just like, let's just go straight to it. Because on your website, you have a lot of different things that you look at. So if you were to describe for the audience what you study and what your research is about.
Yes. So I am a scholar of political theory, or critical Black studies, political theory, political economy, and intellectual history. But my substantive focus is on racial capitalism, anti-communism, and anti-Blackness. And another wing of my scholarship studies epistemology and Blackness. So essentially what that means is I look at the intersections of race, specifically Blackness, political economy. And then I'm also interested in how structures of domination are narrated or legitimated, or how they, what it is that the government says or what it is that particular institutions say that make it seem like oppressing Black people is cool. So that's what I do.
So that's actually a really interesting point to start at. So in what ways have you already kind of been discussing institutions have been dominant and both basically neglectful of Black communities, like, basically fuck them?
Yeah. So I think in every way, every institution of the United States, even the one in which I work, which is the academy, which I refer to as the intellectual arm of the state, every institution has participated in the subjection or the oppression and exploitation of Black people, not least because we came here as property, right? We came here as currency. We came here as labor, and even after emancipation, white folks are still trying to regain that relationship with Black people, right? Because the Civil War and its aftermath were the largest sort of expropriations in history. So unlike other countries that they paid back the slave owners for losing their property, the United States did not do that in a sort of systematic way. And so there have been various systems that have been put in place throughout history to try to recoup that loss, right? So you got sharecropping, you got debt peonage, you got Jim Crow, you got redlining, you have mass hyper incarceration. So all of these structures, in my perspective, the way that I study it is to recoup those economic losses. And so when I talk about the political economy of Blackness, or what I call the structural location of Blackness, it's the way that Blackness serves these kind of like economic functions so that value can be extracted from our lives and our livelihoods, right? So yeah, so
it's almost like, especially the coal that stokes the fire, so to speak. It's like, as long as they always have to have a position to keep their fire going, keep making their money. So like you talked about incarceration, redlining, all these were systems. I would even say the public education system and how they track you into labor fields, specifically to work for their organizations and companies. Those systems have basically been what the U.S. has done to boost their economy because of the fact that they had such a loss from people not paying the slave owners. So now you have these people who are, you know, they own companies and they have endless labor that they can pull from.
Mm-hmm. And so the thing is, so all workers are exploited, right? So everybody that has to like sell their labor for wages, everybody that you got to collect a paycheck, everybody's exploited. But the condition of Black people is called super exploitation. So it's oppression on top of exploitation, right? So for example, for a long time we could not be in labor unions, and these things so that's just one example. These things have a cumulative they're cumulative, right? So it's really, really hard to catch up because there's years and years and years of the shit, right? And so the people I study, which are Black communists, people like Harry Haywood, Claudia Jones, et cetera, they talk about super exploitation as a form of exploitation over and above that of the white working class. So that if you're getting, let's say, $10 surplus value, for this arbitrary, from like a white worker, you're getting $20 or $50 from a Black worker, right? Because for a number of reasons, they're working in the worst jobs, they get the lowest wages, they're the last hired and first fired, and then sometimes you don't pay them at all, right? And so this is why I study Blackness, because to me, if you want to get down to brass tacks, you have to look at our particular group, because we are the group from which the most surplus value is extracted. We're we the most fucked up out here, basically. This is the moral of that story.
but that makes sense, because I was just constantly thinking of the systems that have to exist in order for the U.S. to make the money that it's making, or white families to make the money that they're making. Because what they talk about, I always hear this all the time. I heard this when I was in college. I hear it now about how the fact that Black people don't own property and white people do, and which was purposefully done, has made it so if they have this wealth that they can constantly pull from, because they have this property they pass down to their children or whatever it is. And I think about things like that, and how when we talk about it, though, it's like it's still Black people's fault.
Mm-hmm. And that's the narration. Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'm saying. So the conversation always changes to, okay, yeah, all these structural things might have existed, but it's Black people's fault. And I always wonder how Black people can buy into that.
Yeah, so that's because that's what we're told. It's like, you're lazy, you're criminal, you ain't got no daddy, your mom's a matriarch, like it kicked your daddy out the home, like you don't study hard enough, you don't adopt the right attitude, like all of these things. These are what I call the narrations. This is how exploitation is legitimated, because it's like, well, you don't have anything because you don't deserve it. You don't have anything because you didn't work for it. You don't have anything because you go and you buy a grill and you buy a car and you got these hoes and you're in the strip club. Like all these things, these are ways in which it's seen as a moral failure, right? It's because mm-hmm. Black people do not have the morals and ethics to be successful. Back to what you were speaking about earlier, there's this comedian called Chris Rock. I don't know if people know about him anymore. I don't know how old people are, but the comedian Chris Rock, he made this joke where he said that, and he's very affluent. He's part of, probably the 5%, whatever. And he's like, his neighbor is a white dentist. You see? And he said for a Black dentist to be living in his neighborhood, he would have to invent teeth. And he said, do you know if the richest man in the world had Oprah's money, he would jump out the window and slit his neck on the way down. And that just illustrates like the gross disparities in wealth, even at the top, right? And so even the richest Black people pale in comparison to the richest white people, right? And then the poorest of the poor tend to be Black people and other racialized people. And so that's what we need, in my perspective, that's what we need to focus on.
I see someone in the chat, Dylan Gray said, quote, pull up your pants, so to speak, like focusing on these surface level behaviors and not the structural racism that exists in reality. Mm-hmm. And that's not just even Black people, like even white people, right? Like we have the ideas we're supposed to change white people's opinions and perspectives on us. That's the goal here. Then they'll be less racist, even though there's all these structural things in place that make it so we're not able to, succeed or survive basically in this type of economy.
Yeah, so that's something called, so back in the day, right, this was called moral suasion. So that if it is that
real term? Moral suasion?
Moral
Wow.
suasion. So, and it has to do with this other concept called racial uplift. And then this is where you hear about like politics of respectability, right? That moral suasion is like, if we just convey that we can save our money, right? We're not criminal, we're chaste. That's primarily for women. So you're not, that you raise your family, that then white people will see, oh, they're not savages. Oh, they're not just they're not barbarians trying to just come and rape white women. Like they're not Jezebels, right? And that over time, if you build wealth slowly, if you just work hard, keep your head down, save your money, act right, that over time, Black or white people will come to recognize your humanity. Right. And so there's a story about, so basically, Ida B. Wells, when she writes about in one of her writings about lynching, she talks about how she really bought into this up until the point where 3 of her friends who were shopkeepers, they owned a store, they were lynched. And she said, they did all the right things. They had a business, they were respectable people, they followed the law, and they still got lynched because white people did not like Black competition. And so after that, like, to her, that conveyed that it does not matter how good, how chaste, how moral or upstanding Black people are. That is not the foundation of racial antagonism, which then leads us to this idea about caste, right? This idea.
Right. That's where I was going. You knew where I was going.
So we can make that pivot now.
Get you a quick question. To what degree does moral suasion? To what degree is it a synonym for respectability politics? And to what degree does it differ? Is it basically another term for respectability politics, or is there an overlap but a little bit of difference too? How would you?
So if respectability politics is the sort of like politics, moral suasion is the tactic, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. So your article reviewing Caste was really interesting. For one, I actually read another book by Isabel Wilkerson, The Warmth of Other Suns, and I actually really liked that book. What I didn't like about it was basically kind of what you highlight even in Caste, which is I don't think she really talks about enough about the structural racism that Black people were experiencing that were leading to the migration, or like she talked about like different stories and everything. That was cool. But what it did open my eyes to was the migration overall. I didn't really know much of anything about it. So I was really grateful for that. So in that, I was like, okay, maybe I'll check out some other stuff that she's written. And I recently saw a Caste had come out, and I was like, okay, maybe I'll check it out. And I never got around to it, but I had it in my back of my mind. Then the other day I saw your article, and I was like, oh shit, maybe I should like really when I do read it, take a look at it from this perspective and seeing, if I see the same thing. And basically this idea that we can change the way white people feel, and that's going to lead to social change.
Mm-hmm. It's sort of like, so it's not in the way that she sets up Caste, that she does this comparative thing between like India and Nazi Germany and the United States. So that comparison notwithstanding. So basically she argues that if the dominant caste will have empathy for the suffering of the lower caste and give up their caste privilege and give up their sort of, if they will change their attitudes and their behavior, their day-to-day behavior in their relationships with the lower caste people, then this will resolve the fundamental problems. This will resolve the ways that meritocracy means nothing. So her broader argument is that meritocracy can mean nothing in a caste system, and meritocracy being that if you work hard and you do all of the right things, that the best and the brightest should rise to the top. And so her problem is that the Black elite, they do all the right things. They have money. They are extremely bright. They excel in every way, but they're still Black. They're still discriminated against. White people are still mean to them. They don't give them service at restaurants when they're in first class. White people disregard them, and she gives all of these examples of white disrespect. And her assumption is that, well, if I'm Black and upper class, and white people are still disrespecting me, even white people of a lower class, then this must be a caste system.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's kind of a jump.
Correct.
I was gonna say that's actually kind of a jump. And I don't really know, I wouldn't even say I'm that well versed on different types of systems or anything like that. But it did seem kind of like a jump, especially since India in particular, there are so many things underneath that system that aren't even correlated with anything Western at all, such as a lot of the religious foundation and things like that. So I thought that was kind of a weird comparison in the first place.
We were talking before we started recording, and I was telling Dr. Stelly Burden that this thing feels like the way she describes it, such a Oprah book club type analysis of race. And then she pointed out it actually is literally a Oprah book club book, and it's right there on the cover. So I thought that was ironic that it actually, you can tell it's an Oprah book club book even as you could tell it's an Oprah book club book even as you read it, that it's that simplistic in its analysis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and it betrays the like class politics, right? Because she is concerned about Black elites, right? And so it's no wonder that somebody like Oprah, who went, she was in France and she tried to buy this bag, and she had this experience where the store owner didn't believe she could buy the bag, right? And so that very much reflects the argument that Wilkerson is making, that it doesn't matter how rich or elite Black folks are, they're still treated as others, right? And so of course people like Oprah and Mariah Carey had this in her reading stack. Of course, people who are affluent or who are of a particular socioeconomic status would like the book. And then there's also the white folks, right? Because they don't have to give up anything, right? In this analysis, they don't have to give up shit. They could just be nicer and do better. They could just do better. And it could be a slow process, right? If they just do a little better each day, if they just, they don't have to redistribute any wealth. They don't have to do anything. They just have to just act better. And
I'm sorry.
No. It's bullshit.
I'm gonna take this chance real quick to apologize for saying Stelly Burden. I know it's Burden-Stelly. I just had a brain fart. That was a brain fart I just had. Sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that's just like intentional that people, some of these writers and scholars write this way in order to attract so they can be mainstream and be a mainstream Black intellect?
So the other thing about Wilkerson is that she's a journalist. She's not an academic, right? And so I can concede that. Although I have read books by journalists that are extremely rigorous and rooted in the archive. So there's a book, for example, called Slavery by Another Name. That's about convict leasing. That is very rigorous. It's very well, you know what I mean? And so but if I'm being generous, I'll give it that. But what I think is that I think it's both and. I think that when you have a particular perspective, being in a particular class often gives you a particular perspective, right? So I believe that this is legitimately the way that she sees the world. And then I think related to that is like, she's rewarded for that because the way that she sees the world is very much consonant with the status quo, right? That if you could just make a little tweak here, a little tweak there, then everything will be okay. And so I think, I don't think that she was fronting. Like, I think she really believed that shit, you know what I mean? Because if you see the plumber story, so there's a story in the end about like the plumber, like this plumber comes and at first he's real rude and he's not trying to help her, and her mom had just died. And so it really hurts her feelings. And then she brings up her mom, and his mom had died recently too. And so they bond over that. And then he starts working really hard because he sought empathy in their shared experience of having their mothers have passed away. And so then he starts working hard. He figures out the problem, and she's like, see, if we can only just have more empathy, that is going to resolve everything. And so I think that first of all, she extrapolates from her personal experience and tries to make it seem like that's going to solve the problem for everybody. And then it's also like this one particular experience is supposed to be representative of what's possible. So it's just, it's an abstract narrative
So, but I want to ask them. So, if that's the case, it's just this is just how she thinks. Then my next question is: do you feel like that people who do hold that perspective are the ones that get on the Oprah book clubs and get the celebrities that aren't afraid to have their book, in the background of their, Instagram picture or whatever it is? Like, is it that then that is this is how people who think like that are the ones who get in those positions?
Absolutely. Let me tell you something. There is a man named Gerald Charles Horn who has written close to 50 books at this point. He is one of my mentors, right? Has that man's book ever been on a New York Times bestseller list?
Good point.
And his books are the most rigorous books you will ever read. And he's not one of these people that has 100 books but writes the same shit just slightly differently. He has very, very different types of books. And if anybody should be at the premier Ivy League getting paid, high amounts of money based on the system that we have, it should be Gerald Charles Horn. Right. And that's not the case. Right. And so I all of that to say, like, I do think that you are rewarded for maintaining the status quo. And the other thing is that I've said in other spaces is that capital funds its own opposition. And so and because Wilkerson is offering a critique, like she's saying racism is bad, which is a critique of the society because it's a racist society. That's a critique that can be accommodated. And so then you can throw a few $1,000s at some center, anti-racist center or whatever. You know what I mean? You can have a task force. You can have a few job openings in academia. And then, you can move the needle perhaps a tiny bit. But number one, all of these gains are wholly reversible.
Right.
And number two, it doesn't make any structural change. And so, yes, these are the types of people that you reward because these are the type of people that, they could say, you should do better. Right. But it doesn't jeopardize your position in any way. Right. There's no critique. There's no counter hegemonic critique.
I want to read a snippet from your article, just a few sentences. But you said Wilkerson does not discuss why a disproportionately high number of Black Americans are impoverished or what reproduces this inequality. The chapter titled, "The Heart is the Last Frontier," sums up Wilkerson's view. Self-reinforcing attitudes and behaviors sustain caste. Thus, social change only requires shifting the behaviors and attitudes of those positioned as superior. I thought that was pretty interesting, considering a lot of writers, public intellectuals, even ones that I've liked, essentially have that sort of perspective. It's almost like we have to shift attitudes. We have to shift how people think without digging really underneath that.
Yeah. So there's this motto so the National Association of Colored Women's Club, it was founded in 1896. They have this motto, lifting as we climb, right? Lifting as we climb. And this is, part of what Du Bois called how Du Bois' talented concept is interpreted, right? But so like as the people at the very top, the most capable, the best, as they climb up, they're going to lift up the race with them. Right. But so then in order to lift the race up, the very top has to be able to climb. And if the very top can't climb, how are you going to lift up everybody else?
Right.
Another model is start with all them people that you're trying to lift up. Start there. Right. Start there and ask them, like, what are you suffering from? Like, what is your perspective on how we get free? Right. Like, what is your day-to-day reality? What are the solutions that you propose? Because that's the majority, that's the mass, right? But Black people always had, it's only Black people that have to have leaders. Because what leaders do is they offer a buffer between the overwhelming majority of Black people and the mainstream society, right? It's a way to sort of mitigate what the actual wants, desires, and needs of the overwhelming majority of Black people are. And then you defer to like the Wilkersons of the world who they want to be able to ride in first class in peace. Meanwhile, most of the Black people, most of our people ain't riding in first class. And so that ain't gonna do shit for us.
Yeah. And also I was just thinking, like, how even selfish is that? Like, this is what the concerns of most Black people must be, is that people aren't nice to them when they buy things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as opposed to the fact that they don't even have a grocery store in their neighborhood.
Now there is, so I think that's a great point, right? Food deserts are a thing. Now I think that there is something to be said, like Black people of all across class are followed around in stores. We don't like that shit. But I think, but underneath that is the surveillance state, right? Underneath that is the carcerality of our society. It's not just because it's
criminalization of just our very presence.
Yes, right. So it's not because it's mean or rude or uncomfortable. It's because, like, this is diminishing my life chances, because as we know, our encounters with the police tend to be very violent, if not deadly. And so it's like you can have particular types of scenarios, but it's like, to what end? Like, how are you interpreting that scenario? And then what is the solution that you come out with based on how you understand that particular scenario? And that's the difference between, to me, that's the problem why amplifying the voices of elites is problematic. Because we never get to the real problems, right? We can just, put a tuxedo on it, as I like to say, and keep it moving, as opposed to getting to the problems faced by the overwhelming majority of Black people, but also of society writ large. But it tends to be intensified or exacerbated in our community.
Right. So Doctor, how does this event look to you right here? This seems like a real.
I was going to ask about that too.
Yeah, I'm looking at the kind of, when I see events like this always makes me worry about what the substance of the book is, because anti-racist teaching, and it's Ibrahim Zendi, whose book I haven't read. I can't speak on his book, and Isabel Wilkerson, and it's all about America in the midst of a national reckoning. And we've marched, we've donated, we've contacted politicians, but what happens now?
Isn't that like the most go-to tagline right now?
Yeah. And I feel like this says a lot about what the book is probably like, because it seems mostly about helping white people find redemption and teaching white people, then coming up with any positive program for Black people. Like, everything I see her do to promote this book seems to be more focused on helping white people soul search. Like, anti-racist teaching is a week-long virtual conversations series, and through these conversations we hope to listen, learn, and reflect, and just a giant prayer circle, and I feel like that's another thing that happens a lot with these people who get put to the forefront to do anti-racism.
I love when, like, anti-racist things is always like positive, like this American thing. That was the next sentence on here. Through these conversations, we hope to listen, learn, and reflect as Americans chart. Like, that's really, and you bleeded it before me. You took it off before I could finish reading it, but
oh, my bad.
Listen.
Go ahead.
These say can you see ass motherfuckers. Like, okay, listen. First, like, okay. I want to point out first that Ibrahim Zendi is in Wilkerson's acknowledgments. I always read acknowledgments. You can tell a lot about somebody's politics by who they acknowledge, right? So he's in our acknowledgments in the book. And secondly, the second thing I want to say before I say what I'm actually going to say is, like, this man called Tony Montero has a critique of Zendi and a critique of Wilkerson on Black Agenda Review that are very good. So I recommend those critiques. They are sharp. They are biting. I recommend those. But what I'll say is that, so number one, all of this anti-racist stuff does the work to recenter whiteness, right? And not even white supremacy, whiteness and white folks, right? It's kind of like, what can you do to make our lives better? Because recall, it is the upper caste that has to change their attitudes, their perspective, and their approach. People in the bottom caste, it's like, we're just, we just got to wait around for the white people to act right. Like, it's not about our own agency, because it's a caste system, and caste is rigid and immutable. And so you have to talk to the white folks, right? And so it's a real conundrum, because on the one hand, white supremacy is the problem. White supremacy and capitalism and imperialism, I would say, those are the problems. And so it's a conundrum, because then it's like, okay, if these people and the institutions they uphold are the problem, then you would think intuitively, well, they must have to be the solution.
Right.
But that's not the case. They need to run us this dough and redistribute that wealth. But the solution is mass-based mobilization. The solution is people, right? The masses of people. And so some of which in this country, most of which are white. But if you look internationally, people, racialized people are the majority. Colonized people and people subjected to imperialism are the majority. So I think that in the context of the United States, there is like white people do have to do better. But what that actually means is what is the difference between somebody like Wilkerson and somebody like me. What doing better actually means to me is like, Stokely Carmichael said, if you want to lynch me, that's your problem. If you have the power to lynch me, that's my problem. Right. And so we have to start talking about questions of power, and not power manifested through individual encounters, but power manifested in structures of domination. And that is what's missing, in my perspective, from the takes that are like having fireside chats with white folks, and primarily white elites. They're not talking to regular white people.
Yeah,
like they're talking to white elites. So
yeah,
it's like book club time, basically.
So what is your opinion on events like this one? Let me share my screen here, because I thought this was pretty fascinating. I actually learned about it from looking at your
Oh yeah. This is another perfect example. It's like a even more dumbed down version.
So Van Jones and Meghan McCain joined a timely documentary, The Reunited States. Dark Star.
Weepy Van Jones, Weep Van Winkle, like
Soggy.
He just need to go in and bottle them tears up and sell them on eBay, because it's like he is the quietest. And listen, I am not shaming. I think Black men should be able to express their emotions just like the rest of us. I think that is healthy, but it's like he be crying over some bullshit. Like, you are sad over the wrong shit, in my perspective. Now, I think that this event in some ways is even worse, because he's trying to reach out to the even more. I feel like Wilkerson and them are talking to the liberals. He's doing this event with McCain. I forgot her first name, Meghan McCain or something like that.
Yeah. Meghan.
Right? Who is a conservative. And so there's a way in which we feel like we have to lurch to the right. Well, let me not say me. They feel like they can run to the right, and find some reconciliation with these people that have basically, in many ways told these people that they essentially want you back cleaning their house and picking their fucking cotton. Like, those are not the people. Those are even less of the people that we should be focusing on, in my perspective. And at the same time, it's a two step approach. So it's like you lurch to the right and then you shit on the left. So you shit on the progressive people, the radical people who are actually with you. You call us dangerous, subversive, unreasonable. Our slogans are the reason why, the Democrats are losing seats in the House, all that bullshit, right? And so it's a two-pronged approach where, like, we can't get to a legitimate solution because we don't really even understand the problem.
Sometimes I'm sorry.
Go ahead, P. No, go ahead.
Oh no, sometimes I wonder if his experience with the Obama administration and getting thrown under the bus like shell shocked him or something, and now he wants to play every side of the fence all the time. Because remember, they painted him as like a Maoist, and they pulled up old stuff on him, and he ended up getting. It was under Obama administration he was fired, right?
Yeah.
I don't follow Van Jones, but they do that to everybody. They try to do this shit with Warnock and his statements on Palestine. They do that to everybody. And so it's like, are you gonna fold like a lawn chair? Or are you gonna be like, yes, next question. This ostensibly we have freedom of speech, ostensibly we have freedom of association and assembly.
He could have handled it like Shorty Sherrod.
Yeah.
Shorty Sherrod handled it like a G.
Exactly. You know what I mean? And so it's like, is he shell shocked? I mean, there's many terms we could use for it, but I will say when I'm at my most charitable, I feel like there comes a certain point when some Black people just want a win, right? They've been struggling, right? They've been down so long, they don't know how to get up. And so what they do is, they start to move to the center and to the right. And perhaps that's Van Jones. But my problem is like, okay, if you're going to be a charlatan in that way, you shouldn't be getting paid for that. If you're doing soul searching and figuring it out, I don't think that you should be making money doing that, making money selling out Black people, right? I think that's selling these solutions that are asinine and that are never going to work. So, I mean, I think Van Jones, if he's not an enemy of Black people, he certainly is no friend of ours. And I wish he would shut the fuck up.
So let me ask you this then. How do we mobilize? Because you talked about like the lower, how she talked about the caste, mobilizing. How do you mobilize as at the same time the media and media pundits and the ones that we're learning to respect, which are constantly pushed onto us, have a whole other agenda? So, for example, the conversation changes to representation and diversity, right? So that's constantly pushed. You have these Black people that are in these positions. You have the Van Jones, the Isabel Wilkersons, the people that get seen. They're kind of taking, and as you just pointed out, at the same time, saying these other radicals over here are just, want to destroy everything, and they're horrible, they're terrorists, and all the other things they say. How do you then mobilize if what they're constantly being fed through the media is this other agenda? Because if you think about it, like if you even so much as point that out, people will say Black. Why are Black people always trying to put Black people down? And we're like crabs in a barrel, and
Yeah. I mean, I think that, well, the first thing I'll say is it's happening all the time. It's happening all around us, right? So somebody that I follow, or a account that I follow and very much respect, is a communist, and they talk about like join an organization. And I think I mentioned this when I was in conversation with Margaret, Kimberly, and Danny Haifong, is that joining an organization with like-minded people will help you realize that you're not crazy, right? It will help you realize that you are not the only one, and that there are other people who think like you, that there are other people who are actually working toward the vision of liberation or the vision of a new world that you possess. And so I think that is happening all the time, but of course we don't know about it because these are not the people. You don't get clout from organizing. I mean, there's people who do organizing for clout, but the people who are doing real important substantive work, like we don't know about them because they're doing it. And in some ways that actually is a good thing because Snoop Dogg has a saying, the game is to be sold, not to be told. But anyway, so I think that these forms of organizing are happening all around us. But the other thing too is that we have to believe each other and we have to trust each other, because we can get captured by this celebrity culture or this popularity culture as well, where we also have this idea that that money comes with virtue, right? That if you have money or if you have esteem, then somehow you are fit to rule. That's fucking crazy. I can have $1 million and I can still be trash and I can still not know anything. And I could be, and these people often are oppressive and very, very and backward and all those other things. And so I think that we have to trust ordinary people much, much more. And so I often talk about ethics, epistemology, and politics. So which means it's the things that we value and the things that we care about, and also the way that we understand the world. Those things are important in relationship to what we do, right? How we struggle for power, which is to me politics. And these are the things that we need to think about. We do need to have platforms for people who have radical ideas or leftist ideas, because if people don't know that they're out, people don't know what they don't know, right? And the more that you hear it, the less maybe far-fetched it will sound. If you hear one or two people talking about abolish the police, it's like, huh? Because a lot of people can't imagine a world without police. But then when you actually listen to what is being said, you listen to what could be, what could come after, then it becomes more and more like, oh, okay, I can see that, right? But as of now, these ideas are delegitimated. These ideas are obscured and erased, or they're misrepresented. And so I think that we definitely need to have, for every Wilkerson, we need to have 2 or 3 Gerald Horns.
Right.
I wanted to ask you a question. About, you mentioned at the end books like White Fragility, and we mentioned Ibrahim Zendi, or Ibrahim Kendi, and things like that. I want to know, Ibrahim Kendi's first book is called Stamped. From the
No,
beginning.
no, that's
Sorry.
his second book. His
Sorry.
first book is called The Black Campus Movement, which is actually a good book. I actually teach that book. It's about the Black Studies movement. But but his second book is called Stamped.
I wanted to know, how does Stamped fit into this, because that's another popular book that seems to kind of be talking about something similar. It seems to be a little bit of overlap, because I know it's Stamped from the beginning, and this idea that it's not quite caste, I guess, but the idea that Black people are I guess similar to the social death theory that some other people have. And I was wondering if that fits into this at all, and if that's a better book. I guess what I'm trying to wonder is, was he always where he is now, or did he start at a better place and end up where he is?
You know, that's a question you have to ask him. I liked the Black Campus Movement book. I will reserve. I mean, the Stamp book, it wasn't my bag.
What's in your bag? Okay.
It wasn't, and I didn't like the moves that were being made. But I'm just one person. I'm just, I'm an ultra leftist, as they say, or they call me a Black radical leftist, whatever. But I think that sometimes the more, sometimes getting sort of particular types of respect in the academy and being able to garner resources, you begin to believe your own rhetoric, right? And you begin to produce the things that continue to be well received by particular audiences. And I don't think that Kendi is a bad person. And I don't think that he's malicious. It's strange. He got his PhD at Temple University in Africology. And if you know anything about Africology, the work that he's doing now is nothing like it's not legible that he has, to me, a PhD in Black studies at all, and certainly not from Temple. People have their own critiques of Africology or whatever, but I think Stamped is not my bag. I think that there are other history books that I would prefer. But is it better than the anti-racism and anti-racist backpack and anti-racist, diary and shit? I would say so.
Got you. Have you seen his new book, Antiracist Baby?
Oh yeah. Oh, I said backpack. Whatever. It's all anti-racist everything. Yeah.
Anti-racist backpack sounds realistic. I thought it was a real one too. It sounds like something.
That's probably what's next, to be honest with you. It's crazy because I don't know. Yes, I've seen it. That's not my ministry.
Yeah. The reason I was asking is I'm trying to figure out what's this cohesive. There seems to be I don't want to use the word propaganda, but maybe, there seems to be a project going on with defining how we talk about race. And I feel like since 2014, especially with the rise of Black Lives Matter, there's been this type of desire to make a new national neoliberal conversation about race where there's racism, but there's no racist, really, except for maybe Donald Trump, And it's like, it's not really a systemic thing, but it's like racism just exists in the air, I'm not racist, you're not racist, maybe a few Republicans are racist, but it's in the air and it's just hurting people, like COVID. People are just catching it somehow, And I feel like a lot of these books are kind of in that vein, but it's basically removing culpability from anybody. Like, it's not really, it's kind of systemic, but they act like the systems aren't made of people. Like liberals aren't contributing to the system. They're not benefiting from the system. They just inherited this crappy system that just happens to be racist. And they're as helpless as Black people to do anything about it. All anyone can do is be nice to each other and hope the system goes away somehow,
Well, I would say Kendi's project is the opposite, because to him, everybody racist. He talks about Black racists, like everybody racist.
Oh, okay.
Everybody racist. Everybody.
Wait.
And so
Black people are racist?
Oh yeah, of course. He talks about when he discovered that he was a racist, you know, and the work that he did to not be racist. So it's the opposite, right? It's like it's this reverse equality type thing where it's like everybody is like, you know, everybody's racist because of, as you're saying, this app, because we are, you know, because the systems, but the solutions are not systemic. The solutions are like personal, like doing the self work, and I guess, you know, having discussions and realizing when you're, you know, capturing when you're being racist or having racist thoughts or ideas or actions or whatever. But yeah, so that's part of his whole, you know, his idea is that everybody racist. So
can you give me? I'm not familiar with his work. What is
I found his recent stuff while she was talking. So this is Antiracist Baby. These are some of the solutions. That's kind of small, but yeah. So that's what Antiracist Baby can do. Antiracist. There's also
celebrates all our differences. Uses words to talk about racism. Understands that people aren't the problem. Policies are.
Yeah, but who makes the policies? Like, don't people make the policies? You know, like policies just appear; they just happen. People aren't the problem because policies aren't made by people.
Who is this book for?
It's for kids, I guess, but it's really for the parents. I think it's really for white liberals' parents because where I live in Brooklyn, a lot of people give this book to white liberals who just have kids. Like the NPR.
But it's not white people because look, it's all everybody's racist. So it's not just for white liberals. It's for all these racist families right here. It's for everybody.
Yeah, you're right, actually, because you're right. This goes to everyone. All different combinations. He has them all cover. Whoa.
You know, it's so interesting because it's like such the PBS perspective. I don't think I saw that. PBS had like a whole "how do you talk to your kids about racism" sort of thing. When the whole like the Black Lives Matter marches were popping off earlier last year. And I thought it was really fascinating how PBS it was, where it wasn't even about actual racism and racists. It was just like, I like how T described it. It was just out in the air somewhere. Not everybody's racist, but
it's like COVID. You just catch it.
Yeah, like even this like book you're showing, like you just showed, like it's all in line with that same thing of that we were kind of raised with Disney Channel and Nickelodeon. They're all kids just like you. And they show you some Mexican kid kicking a soccer ball, and there's like some, you know, Nigerian kid who's like beating a drum. You know, it's like
United Color of Benetton ad, basically.
What'd you say?
United Colors of Benetton ad. You ever see those old ads? I'm probably aging myself for that one.
I have no idea what that is.
They used to have this ad campaign for the clothes Benetton. It was United Colors of Benetton, and it would just be they would try to jam in as many races in the ad as possible. And you know, it was just their branding. It was called United Colors of Benetton, and they would just kind of. It was the original like woke capitalism at the time in the 90s, and that type of ad style is what that book reminds me of. Like that looks just like one of those old United Color of Benetton ad to me.
Yeah, it's like liberal multiculturalism, right? It's just like it's like, and it's this whole ignorance narrative. It's like if you're just around people who are not like you, if you just educate yourself, if you just try to get along with people of other colors, races, ethnicities, religions, then that is what needs to happen, right? There's no sense of motive. There's no sense of like investment in the system as it is. It's as if everybody wants to do better in the system, right? And that if only we can be around each other, if only we can understand each other, that, you know, that racism is a problem of misunderstanding, right? And that if we just understand each other, then we'll create, I guess, better policies, which are the arbiters of racism. Policy, and you see, it's policies, not institutions. That's another thing, right? It's policy, not institutions. And so, you know, I mean, listen, at the very best, perhaps these books can be stepping stones. I don't know. But to me, the means always become the end. So if it is that if it is that these become tools of consciousness raising, let's say maybe a white person never knew, they didn't realize that, you know, calling the police on a black person was racist. And now they read this book and they're like, oh shit, like I'm racist. And they read that book, right? And then they continue to read and they're like, oh, well, let me read. Well, I heard, you know, Gerald Horn review, you know, he mentioned this book once. So let me look into Gerald Horn. And they read this book and they're like, oh shit, the whole US is, you know what I mean? So there's a way in which knowledge can build on each other. But what I feel like these books encourage is like, this is all you need, right? Like this is the solution. And so again, something that can become just like a first step becomes like the last step. And then, you check your privilege, you take your purse out and you take out your different privileges, you set them down, you go to the discussion, you know what I mean? You're nice to Black people. You don't say mean things. And then it's like, I did what I could do to solve this problem. And it's not very collective either, right? So it reinscribes this liberal individualism where it's like, you just got to check yourself, right? And maybe individuals come together, but it's not a collective solution. You don't need to work together in any way except for a bunch of individuals coming together to show that they are anti-racist now, you know? And so I just think, it's not structural, it's not collective. And it's a solution that I think makes sense for bourgeois Negroes who have children that they don't want to be subjected to particular types of racism, right? And I think that it's a self-interested approach that comes from a particular experience or a particular striving for an experience of not being, of not being confronted with any type of racism.
And devoid of class analysis, which is one of your strengths, one of the places that you come from.
You know, it's funny, I was just thinking, because being in places like LA, and I'm sure New York is similar. I don't know much about Chicago, but I wouldn't doubt it's similar there. But white people here have this way of letting you know they're not racist by telling you what kind of books they read or showing off the knowledge they know. Oh, this white girl used to walk around with this book. So I worked in community organizing for years in LA, here in LA. And so this white girl wanted to work for one of our South Central organizations, and she walked around with this book, and it was Michelle Alexander's book.
The New Jim Crow.
New Jim Crow. And she had highlights, she had bookmarks, all kinds of shit in it. And she was like quoting it like it was a fucking Bible, right? So that's the kind of shit white people do out here to kind of show you how not racist they are. And I remember I was on a panel discussion for the public library, and this white lady, she gets up and she's like, in the audience question answer, where the audience could ask questions, she goes, oh, I think of racism and I just get so angry at racism. I hate racism. And she's just going in, right? And I'm just like, she put on this whole production for everybody's wicked so we can all see how not racist she is. And I feel like that's like it's like a whole facade. It's like, how do I put on this image of not being racist? So now you have to let me into your circles. And when you don't, you're being exclusive. You're the racist now. Why can't I join your Black sorority or your Black fraternity?
I hate racism is great because it almost seems like racism is this thing that walks around, or again, like racism is a disease. So it's like she hates racism, but I'm sure on Thanksgiving dinner when she has to be around her Trump supporting family at the dinner table, she's not saying anything because somehow race. Don't say I hate racists, including the ones in my family. Like they don't really hate racism. They just it's inconvenient. It's
no. But here's the thing. This is the politics. Hating the racism is enough.
Yeah.
If you hate the racism, you don't got to do shit about it because your morality, right? Your heart. You're literally. I said the chapter. The heart is the final frontier. Your heart is in the right place. So if you abhor racism, if you turn pink when you talk about racism and you ball your fists up like Arthur and that meme, you big mad. Like that is it. That's all you have to do because like you hate racism so much. You just hate it. That's enough. You ain't got to do shit about it. You could just hate it. Or perhaps, if you see something happen.
You can quote some Angela Davis though.
Period. And like, and if maybe if you see, something like, you know, maybe if you're at Thanksgiving dinner with your Trump supporting uncle and he said, you know, he says the N-word, you can say, Bob, don't say that. That makes me really mad, right? And then it's like, oh my gosh, like breakthrough, you know, and that's to me, it's all performative. And
it kind of reminds me of religion, what you're describing, because what you describe reminds me of like when my religious friends say stuff like, oh, I don't hate the sinner, I just hate the sin. And you know, you do your penance, you read your scriptures instead of the Quran or the Bible might be like Between the World and Me and Antiracist Baby. You do your little penance, you know. You try not to hate the sinner, you hate the sin, which is racism, and that's it. And you say you're sorry, and that's
yeah. And it's funny because that panel discussion where she said all that shit was we were talking about that book Between the World and Me, and I was like the only Black person on the panel who thought that shit was bullshit. So they didn't like that. And then I said something about public education, which the irony was this event was for Black History Month, and I was talking about. What I said, the public education system is the worst place for a Black child, right? And you know, but I didn't know until later was that this room was full of teachers. There were white women. They were mostly white women at this event. By the way, when I say mostly white women, older white women, there were only 3 other people that weren't old white women. That was a middle-aged Black lady who I think was middle-aged. You know, Black people can't tell. And then like a white lady and her son who looked like he was there for a school project or something, right? But everybody else then it literally was an old white woman, and most of them were retired teachers. So they got all upset about it, and I said, but wait a minute, you're here for Black History Month. Who created Black History Month? And I talked about Carter G. Woodson. I said I just quoted Carter G. Woodson, Minister of Education of the Negro, but y'all all teachers, right? They didn't like that. So at the end of that whole event, that white lady, the same one who was so angry at racism, she came up to me at the end of it and was just so upset about the things that I had said. And I was disrespectful to teachers and all this stuff. And I was just like, really? And when I told her, I said, well, why did you come here? She said, I wanted to get, she said, oh, I came here for, you know, to get your perspective. I said, right. You wanted a Black perspective on these books in this context. And she said, right. And then I said, so you got it, right? And she got mad and walked out. And I found out later, she said something on the way out, like, well, I guess I'm a racist then. She said that to one of the guys by the door. And then, by the way, she came back like 60 seconds later and said, just for your information, I come to the library for the books. And then she walked back out. But she was so angry at racism 30 minutes before that.
Yeah, and this is the thing that, like, it's a self-righteousness, right? So it's not enough that they can proclaim anti-racism. Then you have to, if it's not accepted, if their vehement anti-racism is not recognized, right? If it's not appreciated sufficiently by the Blacks, particularly the Blacks, then it's like, well, and then there's a litany of shit that, well, I mowed my neighbor's lawn when it was snowing outside. I don't fucking know. Like, you know, I babysitted my Black coworker's daughter. Like, you know, all this stuff. Then they start rolling out all of the things that they did for Black people. It's like, as if we owe them shit. Like, we're supposed to be grateful for their anti-racism. And that's the other thing about this whole like narration, is that it requires that Black people see it and recognize it and appreciate it, right? Because there's a sort of, because of the performative nature of it. And it's just kind of like, I don't got time for that shit. Like, I don't
reminds me of indulgences. When the Catholic Church used to sell indulgences, they would sell forgiveness, you know, and they even reached a point you could start buying forgiveness in advance. Like you could, but yeah, the Catholic Church, one of the exploitative things they used to do was, for certain prices, you can buy forgiveness for different sins. And that's what I think a lot of these people perform for white liberals in the Church of Anti-Racism. They how many books do I have to read? How much money do I have to donate to BLM? That's going to absolve me of my racism. And you weren't giving that woman that. Like, you weren't giving her indulgence. So she came for it. She paid for a product, and you weren't giving it to her. And she lost it. Yeah.
Right.
And if you notice, they read the same books. They donate to the same organizations.
Yep.
You know, because these are the way in which it's legitimated, right? Like, and they have to tell you too, right? It's not like they could donate to Black Alliance for Peace and then not say anything. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like they could read, you know, the Counter Revolution of 1776 and just raise their consciousness. It's like there's a whole performance and declaration to it that is like, that's also like, it's once again like conscripting Black people to have to do more work on your behalf. Like, we have to validate this shit for you. Like, we have to give you your validation stamp. Like, we have to be sufficiently appreciative that this is what you're doing. And that's wild to me. And also, like, just me personally as an academic, I never want to spend my time explaining shit to white folks. I do it in the classroom because of the college at which I work, but in my spare time, you think I want to be going and having these conversations no, I'm trying to talk to Black people. I'm trying to create work and, you know, create useful things for people who are already doing this work and who are struggling. Like, I just have no desire to always constantly be talking to white people and to be, to have to verify to like, hey, you're doing okay, or you're doing great, or whatever. That's just not how I want to spend my time.
That was my issue, honestly, with Ta-Nehisi Coates in the first place and reading that book, is I felt like he was constantly trying to educate white people. And I'm like, but your people need information. You're so busy trying to educate white people when they're the ones who create a system in the first place. And I appreciate people like you who make sure that it goes to us. Like, so we learn content, we learn this information. I think that's way more, I think that's empowering, not trying to change the opinions of white people. But I want to get your opinion on something in particular. Those same white people who study all the books, and they're these liberals, a lot of times they're these Democrats, I'm with her type people, and they push this thing on Black people where we need to have these diverse schools, right? So it's like, the real problem is Black kids and white kids need to go to the same school, so that way the test scores could even out, because Black people are dumb and their kids' test scores are really low, and the white kids have high test scores. We put them in the same school, we'll be able to raise the test scores of Black people, and they'll get more money. And they sell it to us that way, essentially. What is your take on that? Because I know that there's this constant belief that we have to be dependent on white people for our education and our success or whatever else.
Yeah, so I don't think that integration is like an objective good in and of itself. I think that it's the resource question that you just mentioned, because the thing about integration, what happened is that they shut down all the Black shit and pushed all the Black people into the white schools. And that's bad faith, right? Because if you really care about integration, then you spread people out among all of the institutions and give more money to the institutions that have been historically starved of those resources. And so I think it's absolutely a resource question. I think that there's many, many studies that show when schools have the same amount of resources and the same types of access, they perform on par, irrespective of what the race of the students are. And so this idea that we need to be, I think the fact that if it is true that Black students need to be around white students to get resources, that points out the material inequality, the structural inequality, and the racialized nature of capitalism, right? Because why is it that the only way in which racialized people can get resources is in proximity to white people, right? As if that's the objective good. And I think that needs to be fundamentally rethought. And oftentimes, even like at a place where, like at a college, what happens is that diversity is for the enrichment of white people. These are people who may have never been around racialized people in their life. And so part of the reason why you want more people from different socioeconomic or racial backgrounds is so that they can have that experience. Right. And so it becomes part of their experience of getting a college education. And so I think that, many of these things need to be fundamentally rethought. And I think that there are some righteous white people like John Brown. You know what I mean? Like,
that's a high bar.
I know there's other people, but I know there's other ones, but like, you know what I'm saying? And it's, I really do think that there are people who are doing the work and not declaring, not having to make the declarations and don't have that same sort of reliance on validation. And we just see it all the time. I really do believe that exists. But I think for me, my primary focus is like, we need to get our shit up. And then we can sort of revisit other types of conversations. But like, that's what I want for us. I want our community as a whole to have a particular collective, conscious, affirming orientation. Cause like our people, we have some fucked up ideas too, you know?
Yeah.
That's why I go hard on the Black bourgeoisie. Cause like we can't afford to try to participate in this system in that way. It's not for us.
I'll give you one effed up idea that a lot of our own have. You were talking about the idea that of integration as an objective good in and of itself because of the resources, and how that is actually an indictment, because why do you need to be by white people to even get the resources? That's a problem. But I've met people, including Black people, who their fixation with integration is not even that. It's not even the economic resources thing, which is at least pragmatic, even if not enough. Like, you can at least understand it from a pragmatic thing, even if you think it's morally wrong. But these people, I've met people who think that they need their Black kids around white people because it's almost like if black culture is a pathology, and white people are, and their culture is a cure to it. So by being exposed to white people, they're gonna absorb good culture, good smarts, good whatever.
Osmosis.
Yeah, just the proximity to them. You know, they're gonna learn white things which are inherently good, like, you know, tennis and skiing. And it's like, you could be in a Black school. I mean, the Serena and Venus Williams learned to play tennis in the hood in Compton. You know, like Black culture doesn't have to be inherently pathological and need an infusion of white culture to redeem it. But there was a neighbor I had. I mean, this guy, he's a lawyer from a top school. I don't want to give too many clues, so people don't piece together who he is. But I mean, he's a well-to-do guy, and he's always talking to me about like pro-Black stuff, and I'm like, oh, this guy's a righteous guy. This guy's a righteous brother. And then one day he was like, yeah, my son was really acting up, and his son goes to boarding school, and he's like, yeah, so, you know, I had to sit with him and tell him, yo, if you don't get your grades together, I'm going to send you to public school with Pookie and Ray Ray. And I was like, that's a horrible thing to say. Like, why would you even say that? You know, he didn't even occur to him that the messaging he was giving, like the punishment is other Black kids. That's the worst thing I could think to punish you with.
Yeah, that's Black anti-Blackness. I think that Black people, so I wrote it in my dissertation, and it's in that jargon shit that y'all don't like. But like, you know, I wrote about like, you know, niggerization. There's a way in which Black people also have a particular negrophobia. Like they want to flee Blackness in particular ways because of how violence and, you know, economic lack accrues around our bodies. That is true, right? And so there's a way in which people want to flee that. They want to they don't want that experience, right? And so they want to dissociate themselves for anything that represents that, or anything that puts them at risk of experiencing those social ills. And so of course, if it is that white people experience these things far less, then the solution for them is to be around white people, or to comport in a particular way, going back to respectability, that ostensibly will allow you to evade those experiences. And this is where class comes in, right? Because it is true, right? So for example, Skip Gates was arrested outside his home in Cambridge. I believe he lives in Cambridge, because they didn't think he lived there. And then he called Barack Obama. But if you look at all of the poor Black people who are arrested for ostensibly not being where they're supposed to be, they get killed, they get beat up, they go to prison. And so even though there is an encounter with the cops because of Blackness, class mitigates the outcome of that, right? And so I think that that's also what drives some people who believe in Black capitalism, people who believe that, you know, the whole uplift narrative, the whole sort of, you know, the whole because when people pathologize Blackness as well, they're pathologizing poor and working class Black people. They're not pathologizing the Black elite or the Black bourgeoisie, right? They're Pookie and Ray Ray. They didn't say, they didn't say Clarence and I don't know another bourgeois Black name, right? Alfred or some shit, I don't know, right? They said Pookie and Ray Ray, which is like, associated with a particular class politics. And that's also verbatim the names that Obama tried to shame people with, right? Pookie and Ray Ray and feeding your kids chicken and shit. And it's just kind of like, we can afford that.
Obama did use Pookie and Ray Ray too. I forgot about that.
Yeah, because Obama don't like Black people that much to me. Like, so I really think that we can ill afford those things. And I feel like I even get more madder at our people. I understand, right? I understand these impulses. I understand the socialization, but it's like, we can ill afford that, right? Like we don't need that bullshit. Like, because it feels like then we have to struggle on all of these different fronts, which we have to do already, when it's kind of like, you cannot be an enemy of the people, right? It shouldn't be that the more money you get, the more affluent you get, the more suspect you become. That shouldn't be the move.
Yeah.
I think we need to really move away from that.
I think what was disturbing with this guy was his father. I mean, he was hyper accomplished, but I think he planted, without realizing it, a seed in his son that whatever his father's accomplished is because of running away from Blackness. Not like his father's not successful because he's Black, but his father's successful because of how he pushes away from Black culture. So even in passing on his example to his son, he's kind of divorced his example from, Blackness, which I found that the guy didn't even realize he was doing. And
this is a Black man doing this to his son.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is he fancies himself pretty pro-Black, but he has that kind of pro-Blackness that a lot of the for lack of a better term, the talented 10th types have, where he's like, goes to dinners where everyone at the table is, I'm the first Black person that did this, and I'm the first Black person that did that. And, in their mind, they are, and they all probably read Isabel Wilkerson's Caste. They think that they follow that old talented 10th idea that striving is the most noble thing you can do for the upliftment of the race. And the examples that they give, but at the same time he kind of betrayed that he viewed like they're the type of people that will criticize Black people for supposedly thinking that reading and talking proper is
oh my God.
They're that type. But if you look at how they talk to their kids, you realize that they're projecting that, because if you're scaring your kid by threatening to send them to the Black school, then you yourself think that reading and studying and being smart is a
white thing.
Yeah.
That's class politics.
Yep.
It's a straight up class politics. That is why class matters within intraracial class position matters, right? Because that, I'm writing about this in my book. It's called, it's called Schadenfreude, right? There's this concept where you try to point to the real others in order to save yourself, right? In order to say, like, we're fine. It's actually them. And so this works within our communities through class, right? And this is why a lot of Black people can still support reactionary policies, very draconian crime policies, for example, because we believe that there's an inherent defect in poor and working class Black people, right? That they ought to be punished. And because we don't want to look at the economic factors, because then you got to look at the ways in which your economic position is rooted in exploitation, right? And like, you don't want to bring up economics because you don't want to point to the economic disparities, but you don't want your shit getting taken by them Blacks over there, right? Yeah. And so class becomes a way to distance yourself, and it's often narrated through culture, right? That the particular comportment, how you act, what you have access to, education, these sorts of things. Because within our communities, the wealth, sometimes the distances between middle class and working class ain't that big, right? It's
right.
paycheck. It's not income, right? It's cultural capital. And so there's a way in which we, like, when we believe these stereotypes about other Black people, especially, they're often rooted in sort of these class ideas. And it's because because the upper, Black people who are doing somewhat better don't want to be confused with those Blacks. And they themselves fear, they are scared of Black people too.
It's funny because you're raising so many interesting things that I hadn't really thought about until like this very moment. Like LA in particular, well, I thought about this before, but LA in particular is really interesting if you think about this. I think 3 out of the 5 top wealthiest Black neighborhoods are in LA.
Yeah, like Baldwin Hills. Mm-hmm.
I don't even think Baldwin Hills. I think it was up there, but Ladera Heights, View Park, Windsor Hills, right? And so these are, the wealthiest Black areas. And if you guys know anything about the geography, all the Black people in LA live south of the 10 freeway, right? So even if you're you want to in this wealthy Black neighborhood, the wealth it's not that great. I think they average 300 to 400,000 a year, whereas the wealthiest white communities are not anywhere near 300 to 400,000 a year. So like we were saying, that paycheck that gap is not that wide. I live down the street from not too far from Ladera Heights. Nipsey Hussle's store on Crenshaw and Slauson is down the street from Ladera Heights. Like you literally cross the street and you're basically in a lower income neighborhood, right? So it's not even that far apart. But somehow when I was growing up, those are the people I had the biggest chip on my shoulder about, because they were always about the respectability politics. So I would go to school with the kids from there. And so it was like, oh, you're not sitting a certain way. You say slang too much. You say ain't too much. All this, all this sort of thing, how you carry yourself. Your brother got his pants sagging. It was always something, but it was always from sort of this group who thought they were better than us, while they're only a couple of paychecks away.
Yeah, well, because that's how you distinguish yourself, right? It's sort of like, what are the organizations that you belong to? So like, there's a whole, in the South mostly, there's like Jack and Jill or Eastern Stars, this type of, you know what I mean? So though it's cultural capital. That's how you distinguish yourself. That's how in your mind, and sometimes in reality, that's how you protect yourself. So you're not confused with those ones, right? So if you get pulled over, you leave with a ticket, you don't get your ass whooped, right? Yeah. And so it's the function of the racialized anti-Black society in which we live, that we ourselves have to we internalize particular understandings about our communities, and then we have to sort of figure out a way that we can have these distinctions, right? And it's about safety, it's about access, it's about privilege, it's about many, many things. But in the final analysis, it's like, these are slivers that are separating you from quote unquote Pookie and Ray Ray, right? It's nothing. It's more of your motherfucking imagination than anything else. And so I think that if we can just realize that, right? If we could just confront that, then you'll see, like, if it is that I'm basically exactly like this group of people, perhaps I should work to improve their conditions as well as mine, so that nobody's getting their ass whipped by the cops, right? So it's kind of like, but that's not the consciousness that we have, because in our society, we see poverty as a moral failure. We see poor people as disposable. We think that they deserve what they have. It's almost like they have like the plague. We're like, ugh. Think about it, even our popular culture. I tweeted about this a long time ago, where it's like, broke niggas to the left, rich niggas to the right. You know what I mean? It's like you don't even want to be around them. Like, you just can't even stand a broke nigga. Like, you just do not ever want to be around them. And so it's like, we have that mentality, but a plurality of our community is poor and impoverished, right? And so we can ill afford to have those class-based mentalities, or those mentalities about resources. We need to look at billionaires as a moral failing, right? That is a moral failure. When you have more money than you can ever spend in 2 lifetimes, and yet you keep on wanting to have more, and you lord this over everybody else, that is a moral failure. That's deeply unethical, and that's anti-human. And so those are the people that we need to see as they're basically supervillains. Like it's not people who are struggling. It's people who create the conditions that require others to struggle. So that's my perspective.
I wanted to take some time to actually go into the meat of Caste does not explain race, because you go deep in the weeds in a good way. You talk about a book that I first heard of from Q. People knows Andre, Oliver Cromwell Cox. I heard about this book from him a couple of years ago, and then it popped up here as well. I haven't read it yet, but can you talk about Oliver Cromwell Cox and how it ties into and contrasted to Isabel Wilkerson's treatise on caste?
Yeah, so Oliver Cromwell Cox is like a historical sociologist, and essentially his body of work is about the ways that racial antagonism is rooted in the capitalist world system. So there's this theory called world systems theory that basically looks at the relationship among nations and the ways in which nations relate to each other in the system of capitalism, right? That the nation is the sort of unit of analysis for understanding capitalism. And so he's the earliest thinker of this. Like, people often attribute this to like Emanuel Wallerstein and white thinkers, but it's actually Oliver Cox he really is the earliest theorist of this. And so essentially what he argues is that it's capitalist relations. It's relations of labor and exploitation that are at the root of race relations, right? That it's not economic deterministic in the sense that it's the only thing that counts, but it's like it is the economic system that requires particular social relations, that requires the laws and requires particular institutions to maintain forms of exploitation, with Black people being the most exploited, right? So he had, in the 1940s, late 1930s and early 1940s, he had a critique of something called the Caste School of Race Relations, a whole school of a group of scholars who are making a similar argument to Isabel Wilkerson, that the relationships in the South were basically a caste relationship. And he was like, nah. And he wrote a whole book about it called Caste, Class, and Race, right? And he pointed out that this caste school in the 1940s was not doing anything new than a group of scholars have been doing in the 1890s, right? That they had and basically the other thing that he pointed out is that everything they're calling caste is actually race, right? And that all they're doing is replacing this term race with this term caste. And so it's distorting what's actually happening, right? And they're not talking about capitalism in any way. And so that is, in a nutshell, Oliver Cox. And the whole reason I actually wrote that critique of caste is because she had the nerve to mention him in 3 paragraphs in that whole book, as if he didn't write this whole, like a whole very thick book and several articles critiquing this caste school of race relations. Like, how, like, the disrespect, right? And he is somebody that's very, very foundational to my own understanding of capitalism and race, and so I couldn't abide that. So I had to let it know.
The thing that's amazing that she actually read it is that he actually basically preemptively critiques her project, and the fact that she is aware of his book, read it, and still
I don't think she read it. I don't think she read it.
Makes sense.
I think that she had she sent that book in, and somebody was like, hey, you probably need to mention Oliver Cox. And so she went and maybe read the back of the cover, or maybe read somebody's review of it, and then was like, nope, I don't think she read it. There's no way because if I read something that completely decimates my entire argument,
that's my question.
I'm at least going to rethink it. Like, I'm at least going to like do some defensive maneuvers.
That's exactly what I was trying to figure out. Like, how can she actually read it and still do exactly what he critiqued? And what you say makes sense. Maybe she didn't read it except to casually dismiss it in such a way that maybe ensure that other people won't read it and see her work undermined on top of that. So yeah, I mean,
yeah, but we ride for Cox. It's all 2021. We bringing him back. We riding for him. We doing reading groups. You know, we have me and two of my colleagues, my amazing colleagues, just started the Black Agenda Review, which is a feature on Black Agenda Report. I'm going to do a long form essay on Cox's work on there. Like, it's all Cox. And so people go anytime. I hope that anytime people hear Wilkerson's name, they will think about Oliver Cox, because that was, you know, she had to do him like that. And it's like, and your shit is whack. It's different. It's something else if like you were coming hard and you got something that's like gonna change the game. And so then we don't even need to think about him. But you came with that raggedy ass book. Like, no.
You know, that's funny.
We don't know about Cox.
You know, it's funny with Dr. Burden-Stelly. I keep trying to keep in mind that she has to work with these people. These are her peers. So I tried to like soft pedal. Then she just rams it in. She's like, it's raggedy ass book.
Her bad.
I appreciate
I was going to ask you that, because you kind of go hard. Like, no, do you ever like get emails from people?
Do I ever get?
Has anybody ever hit you up like, or like, you know, ran into you at a mixer or some shit and was just like, I saw what you said on this podcast?
No.
Yeah,
I don't know that they want any smoke. Like, I don't. You know, academics ain't gonna bust. They wouldn't bust a grape in a fruit fight. But also, like, I feel like in the final analysis, I think it was a principal critique. Like, I didn't come for her. I didn't come for her edges or nothing. I offered all, you know, it was a principal critique. People try to say it was a beat down. It was, when I first wrote it and sent it in, that was a beat down. And then, you know, Boston Review was like, hey, slugger, like, this ain't it. Right. And so it became what it was. But no,
if this is the toned down one, I need to. What the hell did you turn in?
Well, you were pretty polite in this. You just kind of beat her down with the argument, you know.
But that's knowledge. I beat her down with knowledge.
Yeah. No. Today is raggedy ass though. You didn't put raggedy ass in this though.
I did raggedy ass. I think I put worn. I think I said worn. And then my colleague Peter Hudson, he has this phrase blanched and desiccated that I like to use in quotes. And I think I put that in there. I think I had a few adjectives that they were like, well, and so it's not, you know what I mean? And so I don't have a podcast. Somebody asked that. I don't. We thinking about it. Me and Gerald Ball are kind of thinking about something. But
that would be great. I was just talking to Gerald Ball 2 days ago on a stream as well. Yeah, that would be a great podcast too.
But the thing is, like, I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. I think there's a lot of really dope like Black left podcasts, this type of podcast. So it's kind of like, you know. And it's like, it's probably the same type of audience. So like, I don't know if we need 58 podcasts. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. So I don't know. But in terms of, you know, I think that the way the punishment comes in other ways, right? So it's not like anybody's going to step to me. I mean, let's go, right? Fine. But it comes in like, you know, there are gatekeepers, right? So you won't get considered for particular jobs. You might not get particular grants. You know, I do like, you know, they're not going to ask me to come on CNN or whatever, which I wouldn't go anyway. It's a waste of my time. But you know what I'm saying? So it's sort of like that. There's a way in which you lose out on whatever types of quote unquote privileges that the Wilkersons or Kendys of the world will have. And I'm okay with that. So that's sort of how it manifests, you know, because people, nobody likes to be told that they're wrong in academia.
Yeah.
Academics are megalomaniacs with inferiority complexes. They don't like to be told they're wrong.
I know you have to go. Do you have time to just answer this question and then you can bounce? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think both of us are.
Yeah.
There it goes.
At the same time.
Huh? Oh, is this question?
Yeah.
That my essay would have been, okay, how do you respond to the critique that I heard recently that your essay would have been more impactful inside of a Black independent publication? Yeah, that was Sundiata Chajua. That was one of my mentors. I don't think it would have been more impactful in an independent Black publication. I think that I put that out there because I needed to have a wide circulation because her book was circulating. Her book wasn't circulating all that big in Black circles. It was in the broader circles. And so they needed to see that, hey, number one, there's another way to think about her intervention. And number two, I think so I think doing it in the Boston Review allowed for me to speak to multiple audiences. That being said, I do think that there needs to be conversations within Black independent and specifically Black left independent publications, but it would have been a different article, because I feel like there's a lot of background that I did and a particular tone that I took because it was Boston Review. In a Black left publication, it would have been, the spirit of the critique would have been there, but it would have been a different conversation. And so I do think that, and I think so, for example, Tony Montero, his critique, I think, was great for Black left media. Like, he went in, and I think that that's what needed to be done. But I guess it depends on what people mean by impactful. Because as we know, like, our shit don't be circulating like that. So what does impactful actually mean? You know?
Yeah, and I agree in that everyone I've seen read this book. Where I live in Brooklyn, I live in basically the now gentrified Bed-Stuy. There's a lot of people. This is the book now that a white person performatively reads for people, so that people can see them read it. It used to be Between the World and Me, but basically it's people sitting outside in the steps of the cafe and they read this book. And I think really this book is made for the white gaze, and I think it would have more. I don't really know many Black people who read this book, except for like the really, really like Black Democrat, middle of the road type respectability politics person. Yeah, so I agree with you.
Negroes. But let me tell you something.
Mm-hmm.
Case in point, I wrote this piece called "Why Claudia Jones Will Always Be More Relevant Than Ta-Nehisi Coates" in Black Agenda Review. I wrote that. It was a couple years, maybe 3 years ago now, 2017. But did nobody know about that shit? You know what I'm saying? But if you also
Claudia Jones, I don't know who that is.
Okay, so Claudia Jones. So Claudia Jones she's a Black communist woman. She was, she got deported in 1955 for being a member of the Communist Party. She was Trinidadian born, but grew up in the United States. She's the one that wrote, so the article that most people know of hers is called "An End to the Neglect of the Problems of the Negro Woman." So she offers this theory of triple oppression, which then so people equate that with intersectionality, and some say it was a precursor. I don't read it in that way, but essentially she talked about, the ways in which Black women are oppressed as women, as workers, and as Black people. She's just lit. I fucking love her. If you look on Twitter and you see the Black woman and the Asian man in my, banner or whatever, the Black woman is Claudia Jones.
Okay.
That's Claudia. That's my girl CJ. And she started Carnival in Great Britain when she was deported to Great Britain. She did the first Carnival, and so she's lit. But it was basic, I think Ta-Nehisi Coates is whack, and anyway. Yeah, so I did, right? So I write often in Black publications, and I wrote that particular critique of him. But again, the circulation is different, but there are conversations I only want to have with my people, period. Right. And I have those often. And then there's sort of broader critiques that I want to levy to be like, stop reading that shit. Mm-hmm. And I also provided hella other books that people could read in there. That was the other point. It's like, there's a whole bunch of stuff that will get you where you need to go.
Yeah. There's a lot. I definitely, Dr. Burden-Stelly, thank you for coming. But I also want to let people know, do not think that this podcast was a substitute for reading the article, because we didn't even crack the surface of it. Yeah. There's a lot of, it goes deep, and it mentions a lot of books, and it talks about everything from Gunnar Myrdal to Claudia Jones to Oliver Cromwell Cox, and it goes through the whole lineage of the caste versus race debate. And you just want to read the article for sure.
Maybe if Dr. CBS is down, we can go deeper into it on a podcast.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you don't really want to hear me talk about, I just feel like that's so boring. I just feel like I'm happy to talk about it.
What we usually do is we have the live streams for topical things and lighter things, but the actual podcast is where we like to go deep and talk about theory and stuff like that. So that's why we're kind of keeping it light. But yeah, we would love to actually have you on and talk about the deep theory and the lineage of thought, like especially because we didn't get to go into the leftist and anti-capitalist thing too much, and you're very heavy into not just the race work, but the leftist and anti-capitalist and the anti-communist, black anti-communism, Harry Haywood. That's something. Claudia Jones. I would love to go into all of that. Yeah.
I'm absolutely. I'm down. I could talk about Claudia and Harry Haywood and all my people all day. So I'm happy to come and talk about that for sure. But it's boring. Like, I don't know. That should be boring to me.
You can come back on here to talk trash. They can a live stream to talk trash. They can always do that. We can always have fun.
But people go to the podcast for the things that you think that you're saying is boring. I don't think that's boring anyway. But you're talking about people who are looking for that type of content. So we're looking for people like you to kind of break down these conversations that are happening, and the ones that some of them you're leading, right? Yeah. So we would definitely love to have you want to talk about it. It's not boring. It's like it's like dope shit to be able to
come back on here for the fun stuff.
So there's two. So there's a piece I wrote in Monthly Review called Modern U.S. Racial Capitalism, Some Theoretical Insights. I talk about Cox in that one as well, and then the Boston Review piece. So maybe we could talk about both of those, because that's where I really lay out my own theory of racial capitalism. And then, if people want to read it, I mean,
absolutely,
skim it. It's not, it's whatever. But let's talk about settlers. Okay, you mean white folks?
Yeah. You're talking about the book. You're talking about the book Settlers by Jay Sakai.
Oh, that book. Okay, well, I didn't write that, so I don't know. But no, always. So I'm happy to come back whenever. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for I don't know how many people were here, but thank you for listening to me ramble on and curse like a sailor.
Thank you, Dr. Burden-Stelly.
Where can people find you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I'm on Twitter, Black Left AF. I'm on Instagram, Black Left AF. Don't add me on Facebook. I don't add nobody on there. I have Clubhouse, I guess, but I don't get it. I don't understand anything about Clubhouse, but theoretically I'm on there. But Twitter is where that magic happens. Twitter is, to a lesser extent, Instagram. So.
And we have to have Dr. Gerald Horn on as well, because
absolutely.
We'll talk to you about that. As well.
He might need to do for me. I'm gonna have to just listen.
Yeah, that's my main man. Yeah, no, you gotta have him. He's real chill. He's real.
So, if you send me the links to the articles that you just mentioned, we can make sure and put that in our Discord and even Twitter. So people are asking in the chat.
I already Googled them while she was talking, so I'm gonna put them.
Oh, you got it? Okay.
I got it up. All right, Dr. Burden-Stelly, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for being patient. I know you had to go for a while now. So
don't worry about it. Thank you. All right. Good night, folks. Bye.
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 Oh man.